would you say, I mean, to me, I've gotten to this point in my mind where I recognize that revolution is not possible without abolition. It's just not. Like those things to me are inextricably intertwined. And based on what you're saying, that just verifies that to me. Because when you're saying that the largest needs in Black community or in your Black community and other vulnerable communities, the largest need for community aid is dealing with police misconduct and police brutality and the punishment bureaucracy. So that's what then clearly revolution, it has to involve ending that, because it is not working. It's just not working. So I don't know if you want to give some like recent examples of some of the stories that you have, so that people understand what we're talking about. And again, I am so beyond that this is reformable. This is not reformable. It just isn't. So yeah. So would you talk a little bit, give some examples of some of this, of the crap that people deal with on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to affirm what you said. The policing system was never designed to protect people, right? It was never designed to care. It was always designed to control, and it was about property control. And that's still what it is, and the reason why it exists. So I 100% agree that it needs to be abolished because it was never birthed in trust. So some of the current stories that we are working with. So we've had, I would call it a crisis of injustice in Colorado. The stories that have made that global space, like the stories of Elijah McClain, are echoes of what has been happening in this state for a very long time. And so in most recent times, we have been walking alongside the families of Kylan Lewis, who was shot by the Aurora police unarmed. He had a cell phone and a snack in his hand, and he was gunned down, one fatal bullet, one fatal shot by a SWAT officer. And SWAT, we know, are trained to shoot to kill, right? And that's exactly what he did. He moved from a non-lethal option to a lethal option before he engaged with Kylan Lewis. And sure enough, we had a mother who had to bury her son. We're also walking alongside the family of Jalen Sebron. And this is probably one of the most egregious cases that I've seen as I've been doing this work. Jalen Sebron, all of 23 years old, turned 23 years old 2 days before he was slain. And he went to it was an event center to celebrate his birthday and to tell his family alongside his fiance that they were expecting their first child. And so inside of the main event center, there was a situation that took place where his family was under attack. And so Jalen went into a mode of protection. He was a legally registered firearm owner. He understood exactly what it meant to be in restraint position, to be in protection position. And he was also in an open carry county. So when he was getting his fiance and his sisters to the vehicle to get them to safety, he simply had his firearm pointed down towards the ground. And when the officer showed up, first off, in the body cam footage, the officer is putting together an AR-15 as he is arriving on the scene. He gets out of the car, and within 7 seconds, he's engaged with Jalen Sebron. And within 3 seconds, he's already shot 9 rounds from an AR-15, of which 7 of those hit Jalen Sebron in the back. Jalen was not even turned towards the officer or making a threat to anyone, and he was shot in the back 7 times with an AR-15. So that was obviously the opportunity for total destruction and total annihilation of someone's life. And so we are walking alongside that family. And then there was another story that recently went at that national level, and it was the execution of Rajon Bell Stubblefield. This man was shot 3 times by the Aurora police, of which that 3rd shot was a bullet straight to the head. And it was something that, we watched him being baited into his own execution. The wild part about Rajon's story is that he was actually in an accident before the officer came on scene, or as the officer was in pursuit of him. And interestingly enough, I was the one that he rear-ended. And I just happened to be in the area, doing some shopping. And one of the loudest activists against policing in the city of Aurora and in the state of Colorado happened to be the one that he rear-ended. So I got a front row seat as I watched that officer bait that man into his execution. And so all of these families, when we talk about justice, all of these shootings have been deemed justified by the legal system that we have to navigate. And so these families now are left with only an opportunity to pursue them in court via civil litigation, but we continue to fight. And so we're doing a lot of work to change the laws here in Colorado. We've got a legislative session that we are very actively engaged in, and we've got a proactive law that ideally will become at least a deterrent for what we're seeing with what is happening to our people.
Yeah. MiDian, I'm curious from my perspective, what impact, if any, do you think ending qualified immunity would have on communities?
I think that ending qualified immunity, I think it elevates the conversation in a community as far as what police accountability looks like. However, if you're not able to move that conversation from concept to practicality, you still have a problem. In Colorado, we have a bill. It was a Senate Bill 2217 that removed qualified immunity from officers in the state of Colorado. And it also created some measures where you're not able to just hop from one jurisdiction to another if you're an officer. The post-certification is also impacted when there are some liabilities that are founded. But what we are seeing is that bill is still too conceptual because it's been being litigated, and interpretation did not happen at the statutory level. Interpretation is now very vague, and we're seeing that happen in the courts. So qualified immunity, removing that is one step. But what happens when we have that conversation is we're still in a reactive state. We're still talking about someone burying their child, and then that law turns on. That's not enough. And that's what we've challenged our legislators to let them know, that every time this happens, we've got the system looking at these families saying, we've broken no law, and they're burying their children. And so we looked at the lawmakers and said, if they're telling us they're breaking no law, you're the lawmaker. You need to create a law that actually does protect the people that it's supposed to serve. So I think that the conversation about removing qualified immunity is important. It is still reactive, and we have to do more.
I would definitely say, from my perspective, that eliminating qualified immunity creates the type of necessary, it opens up a necessary floodgate, which I've always felt is the biggest issue with policing in the United States, which is there is a code of silence that exists amongst police, those that are actually there to serve and protect versus those that are clearly there for reasons other than that. And when you have these bad apples that get protected, it ultimately comes down to financial implications. And if there is any inkling that their activity, what they end up doing on the job could actually affect their ability to not only make a living, but to have a pension, that's where police will police the police. They'll have no choice, because under no circumstances should police brutality, misconduct, in any circumstances be financially responsible. That burden is placed on that of the citizens that live in a given community. It should be on the police, full stop. Now, again, like you said, it's not the action that is going to be the silver bullet that ultimately ends the problem. But I do think it's one that, if it were to be undertaken, would substantially improve where we stand today. Because today, it is a total free-for-all. And I'm curious what other layers might actually exist. I do believe that you probably have a lot of problems. I mean, I've been to Colorado a few times. Jen has obviously lived in Colorado. I'm guessing that there probably are also problems with, people who are, let's say, members of white supremacist groups who end up in policing. And this is something that they take pride in, no pun intended. Where do you see it in terms of the trajectory of what policing has become today, what type of people are attracted to it, and what type of either legislation or initiatives would you want to see to ultimately make the change that is necessary?
Sure. So I think that policing today is what we're living out is just an iteration, right, of what policing has always been. It has always been an entry point for those who want to be masked behind a badge, a uniform. Essentially, countless people have traded the hood in for the badge, right? And so I think that also this is a space where you find yourself disconnecting and disassociating yourself with your own community when you are in spaces of policing. It's almost in a training, and it's a culture to where, you go from the Black community saying Black Lives Matter, and then we come out somehow, some way with interpretation of Blue Lives Matter. And so when you disassociate yourself from your own community and your own humanity, there's no entry point for care. There's no entry point for intentionality and engaging thoughtfully without bias and without cover up and all of the things that we've seen. So I think that the entry point for the police is, this is a space where you are armed and deputized to do as much damage as possible. And you would want for, I'm not going to say that every single police officer is thinking through that lens. However, I do know that every single police officer has an entry point of that lens, because that is the culture that they are coming into. You can be the nicest person, but when you are inside of a system that does the steal, kill, and destroy, the nicety of who you are as a person is not going to outdo the culture that you unfortunately are upholding and that you're ascribed to. So with that being said, I think that when policing becomes a pattern of what we're seeing today, it's only a matter of time before those nice people have to shift, adjust, and adapt to that culture. So, but legislatively, what we would like to see is, we actually would like to see things that are proactive. Anytime that we've looked at these cases, these shots are being fired within seconds of officers arriving. The narrative of "I feared for my life" is an umbrella that they use when they show up. And it is absolutely obnoxious to even try to accept that narrative, because you're showing up in full armor. You're showing up with the helmet, with the bulletproof vest. You are geared up and down, and you have the probably the most lethal weapon on scene. So you fearing for your life and claiming that you have to make a split-second decision is not a narrative that we should have ever accepted, because that's just not the reality. So legislatively, we are asking for something to be much more proactive. One of those measures is, when we talk about the body cam footage, that's part of the problem as far as the way that the policing system is able to control the narrative.
Right.
They go, they kill, and then they say, shame on the person we killed. We're a better community without them, and we have a hero amongst us because they killed this bad person. So body cam footage having to release before the officers or before the system is able to criminalize and dehumanize is critical. If you take away the opportunity for them to control the narrative, and now you have a system that requires that the community metabolizes what happened on that scene first, that is a proactive way that you can start saying, if you do this, this is going to be something that will be exposed, and you will have to answer for it with intention and with honesty. We also believe, in the midst of that body cam footage piece, there needs to be a gag order. The police don't get to come out and criminalize and dehumanize anymore. Remove that opportunity, and now they have to start speaking from a lens of honesty. Another measure that we are asking for is, when we talk about paid administrative leave, let's actually start talking about impacting that compensation. There should be a percentage, right? Paid administrative leave, having a tiered percentage of, if you go on paid administrative leave, you are not going to get 100% of your pay. So now when you do show up, like you were talking about, Peter, you do have to have a conversation with yourself to say, hey, you know what, if I pull this trigger, my livelihood is going to shift and it is going to change. We also believe that the families should be afforded victims assistance. When these families have to bury their child, they are not afforded any victims assistance, at least not in Colorado. I don't know if it's happening anywhere else. And they're telling these families the reason why they don't qualify is because there was a crime committed. Well, funny thing, we never got to court. That person never saw their day in court. So how can you assure that there was a crime committed unless you're talking about the officer, right? So that's another measure that we would like to see, because once we start impacting the funds that are tied to other spaces, there are more stakeholders that start to come to the table and ask that please stop killing these people, because this is impacting our bottom line. And then the other piece is, we formally believe that police should never be able to investigate police when there is officer-involved shootings or brutality. That needs to be something that is independent of the police. And so what we are asking our state to do is to have the Attorney General's office have an independent unit that will investigate officer involved shootings or officer involved brutality, so that it removes that bias that we know is going to happen and that we know is we're going to see. It also removes the opportunity for the district attorneys that are oftentimes aligned with the police. And that's the reason why we continue to hear these narratives of a justified shooting. So those measures, we believe, are going to offer some proactive ways that will start to protect the people versus waiting for something to happen and allowing death or brutality and trauma to normalize when our laws turn on. That's too late, and that's not enough.